Hmm. A tough act to follow after a great dance and a musical piece. But since I'm a creative artist, I actually fit well right after these performances. I try to really ask this one question. Can we touch sound? Is that even possible? Is it a question that we all ask? But I have been asking this question for 13 years right now. Ever since as a child, I've been listening to Rahman music, where I'm looking at a cassette player with a display that was basically spectrogram of an audio. When I became a sculptor, I was thinking, what if I could actually translate this spectrogram into a full-fledged sculpture? And that is what you see on the screens. It's a work called Column of Sound, where I use audio spectrograms to create sculpture that not just is a static form, but something that transforms the invisible into visible, tangible form. And that was an exhibition that was held in Australia, and this is the sculpture called Column of Sound. But how did I actually do it? Let's just see that with a little visuals to help us. So this is what you already see in your mobile phones in a lot of apps that we actually use to engage with sound or music, right? So I kind of flipped the whole story around, used this very spectrogram, that frequencies, to further slice them down and use this as a reference for me to make the sculpture. So now the sculpture does not just stay there, but it actually starts becoming site responsive. It becomes site specific. So each time the sculpture is exhibited, it feels different. It metaphorically is different. And that is the questions I posed. Continuing this practice of posing questions, I was asking what did the artist before me do to redefine what art means. On your right in the image, there are two images here. On the right, you can see an image of Marcel Duchamp's fountain, a urinal that was declared as art in 1917. Just imagine what this could have done to the art world. Everybody was shocked. How can a urinal be an art form? How can it be called a sculpture? But it was called, and that redefined what modern art is for the rest of us. On the left, you will see an installation that I had done as part of a British Council fellowship in New Delhi, where I've used Indian toilets as part of a larger installation, which talked about class, which talked about the politics of space, and also talked about dignity in the Indian context. So these are the questions we could all ask. And as an artist, I am at the privilege of being in the middle of, asking these questions. Now, from what was a redefining movement in the art world to now what was already in our own heritage. This is an image from South India in Karnataka, from a temple inside the Sanctum Sanctorum, where you will see these two pillars. What is unique about these pillars, apart from any of the architecture, is you will see right in the middle this very beautiful sheen. It's completely polished. It's mirror polished. Not done by design, but by participation and interaction. It's just people who've touched that pillar over centuries to create that sheen. It shows that art and architecture have to have interaction, have to be participatory, have to lead to a dialogue that is tactile and not just conceptual. And this is what led me to make my next artwork, which is Whirling Man. Whirling Man is a sculpture that is kinetic in the way it is designed. So it's a human-powered sculpture which has a cycle chain mechanism where someone can actually rotate the sculpture. So now it's just not the physical form that they're looking at, but they're also understanding weight. They're understanding things that they've never thought of in a physical form. So this is how I kind of like to engage with my audience in the art gallery setup. But does it stop there? If you look at the form, it's got a silhouette. If you can look at my profile like that, so the sculpture is the exact profile of me rotated on a singular axis. So I'm looking at ideas about the physical aspect of how we function, how our planet functions, ideas about geology, ideas about physics. All these come into the practice. And this is an exhibition that I literally had to break walls. How? The scale of the sculptures that I was taking inside the gallery was too big for the gallery. So I actually broke one of the glass walls of the gallery. So when you push what sculpture means, when you push what your practice means, it really transforms the space. The sculpture exhibition that I held had exaggerated toys. They had cast automotive parts made in concrete. It had interactive installations with bones mimicking the mammoths from the Smithsonian Museum. So the ideas can really help us move into different areas of life, really helping us think through all these ideas. From breaking walls, now I've started entering inside a sculpture. Why should a sculpture be something that is just looked at from the exterior? What if you can actually look deep inside the sculpture? What if you could look at the rawness of it? What if you could look at how it's constructed, the interiors of a sculpture? And this led me to an exhibition in Germany where an industrial warehouse was converted into an art exhibition space. Imagine 100 years earlier, it used to actually cast drainage covers. Now it hosts art exhibitions. That's what art can do. It can transform spaces that were abandoned and then start dialogues about life, about politics, about art, about a lot of other things. And this sculpture is called Selfish Love, where I'm talking about an idea which is very personal to me, and it comes from the Middle Eastern philosophies. You've just seen a sculpture that was allowing people to look inside. What if someone can actually climb on a sculpture? So today's playgrounds are filled with cautionary notes, restrictions, rules. You don't see kids. Kids are now orderly in a playground. Whereas in my exhibition, they're allowed to climb on the sculpture. They're allowed to rock the sculpture itself. So it's like a rocking horse, but then it's in a sculptural format. So I'm basically taking away the idea of pedestalizing. Putting something on a pedestal means veneration, means blind worship. What if we could change that around, use the analogies that we've earlier talked about in terms of participatory art, in terms of interaction, in terms of dialogue. So that is an idea that I'm really fond of, and this work is called My Fish. I think you get it. From now, being very playful also means I started to have a lot more time with myself, which means I'm starting to having conversations with myself. So what does that mean, having a conversation with yourself? We do that, right? We go in a corner or we just sit around and then we think we're having a conversation with ourselves. Does it imply that there's two people? There's one listener and there's one speaker within yourself. So we're accepting the fact that there's duality that exists in our own bodies. And this is a work that kind of talks about that idea, where you have two self-portraits, and then there's a glass. Again, I'm going back to this idea of representing an audio of my own self, where I record a 1-minute conversation and use that spectrogram to depict this idea of conversation. Now that we've had a conversation with two faces very evidently, what if I take that face out? What if there is an absence of face? So here is a work that is titled Facebook from the social media app, but it is literally 4 books stacked together and a face carved out of it. So it's the absence of a face that is more important for me, not the presence of a face. Because today, Our faces have become face IDs. They've become the only identification we have. Isn't there a whole body? Isn't there so much more than just our faces? So what are we stopping ourselves from expanding with this definition of what face means, right? Because in a world that is filled with visual stimuli, I think there are so many more opportunities for us to kind of explore. And that is where I worked with this idea of Facebook. Now, since I've already started beginning to start to work with the books, I said, let's go deeper. Let's go to the source of where the book comes from. From trees, from the Mother Earth, from this biosphere. Okay, now let's just think of what is the largest organism on this planet Earth. It's mushroom, it's mycelium, the very thing that is a root network that's engulfing the whole of the planet. And I'm using that very mushroom material, the fruiting body of which is called mycelium, to grow sculptures, a living sculpture that can grow. Maybe during an exhibition period in 1 month, it grows from 1 feet to 2 feet, and then it stays forever. Maybe it becomes an inert material. Questions about sustainability, questions about what is the future of materials in our current context of overconsumption, of exploitation. Can we create materials in our own backyards and then use them as furniture, as art, as building material, as insulation? So many more ideas, right? From one invisible organism that we do not see a lot to another invisible force, the wind. You've all seen canyons. We've seen right underneath a waterfall, you will see these beautiful rocks that are just carved like sculptures. And we've seen canyons also like art exhibitions. They're like a large installation. And that is the idea I'm using here. I'm using wind as a collaborator with me. So this is called the way of the wind. I'm using wind as a collaborator to carve sculptures out. Metaphorically, I'm simulating it in 3D softwares, but the core idea is to mimic what wind does, because our Deccan Plateau, all these boulders we see on hillocks, they're actually carved by wind over centuries, by wind carrying grit sand, hitting it, slowly chipping away a millimeter, a micron of stone, and then creating these beautiful forms. So there I see a beautiful collaborator that I can work with. This now brings me to Whirl, which is my latest sculpture that was exhibited in Sydney last year. And Whirl is a sculpture that mimics what we just saw, a dance form. But this dance form belongs to the whirling dervishes from Turkey, the philosophers who work with this idea of connecting the earth to the larger sky. So they do this swirling motion, a spiraling dance to connect their bodies to something that's above them. And this is, or what do you say, a capture of frozen movement of a dance. Somebody just doing that spiraling motion. And then what if I could freeze that and then make it in aluminum? These are the kind of ideas that I'm thinking about. Which leads to where my roots are. My roots are as a sculptor, coming from a lineage of stone sculptors from South India. We've been sculptors working with stone for generations. What does that give me? It gives me an opportunity to pay homage to that tradition. So when there was a museum called Constitution Museum being built last year in Delhi, I was invited to make a sculpture there. And the premise was the Constitution itself. And then I said, what else? The national emblem that is on the cover of the book. So I have to work with the lion capital from the Sarnath Museum. So here you will see a very modern take on what a lion capital is. So it's a tripart composition. I'm kind of really trying to pay homage, at the same time break away from the tradition of what sculpture means. Again, I want to bring back to our tabla performance today. What you could just hear, there was a little reference to the monsoons, the calmingness of this rain. This sculpture called Sound of Rain is a capturing of that first drop that falls onto the ground. But not just the visual, but also that sound of that first drop that falls onto the ground. Sound of rain. Ideas that actually help me think beyond. All of this leads to where? Entropy, chaos. We're all living in a world of disruptions, of not having focus. This sculpture is created with layers of wood, hundreds of them, combined, stacked together, and then carved to create this form. It is an epitome of entropy. It is a measurement of chaos, which leads me to the last two images that I'll leave you today to think about. Does sculpture have to be just physical object that doesn't move, doesn't live? What if it is a performance? And this is an art form called performance art, where I use a body. So the body also becomes a sculpture, but it is also performing. It is also kinetic. Here, I'm questioning rituals. I'm using cleansing as a way. So the vessels can be sculptures. They can also be so many other more things. And I leave you with this final image that was shot at the tank bund, right opposite there, where this is an enduring performance art piece where I'm working with brooms as a way to look at what performance art can do in the world of ritual and cleansing. Thank you.